Hey everyone, Andy Rafael from eTeknix.com, and today we're going to be looking at the Antec DF600 Flux, or Flow Luxury. But I guess Fluxury was probably not the best word. Let's do this. This just doesn't have enough RGB to keep my CPU cool. I mean, what am I going to do? Wow, the Antec cooler H2O, K120 and K240. This has got enough RGB and it's one of the most affordable AIOs on the market. I better click the link in the description to find out more. So the DF600 Flux, where does it really belong in the market? Well, to start with, looking at the price, you're talking about $69.99 in the UK and about $10 more in the US. Based around that price point, there are a couple of really big kind of contenders out there on the market. You've got the NZXT H510, but conveniently, compared to this, it doesn't come with as many of the features in terms of the ARGB fans and so forth. You've also got the Pure Base 500 from Be Quiet, again, kind of lacking in the included fans. And then you've got Corsair with the 275R. So at least on paper, the DF600 Flux looks like it's offering a lot more features to the table for about the same kind of price. So let's talk about the styling to start with. Well, the front, I'm going to admit, is a little bit of Marmite. It's not my personal cup of tea. It does have acrylic on there, which you can probably see straight away, especially in the B-roll that we're going to overlay, that it is a complete dust magnet. It also comes included with 3 addressable RGB fans, and we'll talk through them a little bit more in some detail later on. Now, the beauty of this design is I think it's going to be probably more favoured for the younger generation because it looks a little bit edgy and a little bit extreme. It does actually seem to have pretty decent airflow down the sides, at the bottom, at the top, and of course on the other side. Now, when it comes to branding, Antec have actually kept it really simple. We've seen this in quite a few of their cases as of late. There's a simple kind of Antec logo. That sort of seems like what they've changed to, and they don't really need to plaster their name all over it. I've never understood brands who do that. I mean, if you're buying a case from brand A, brand B, you don't really need to put your name on it. We know what it is. We bought it. Now, taking a look at the left side of the case, it has got a 4mm tempered glass side panel with a black border around it. It's held in place by these captive screws, which I really do like, because generally speaking, at this price point, you're not going to see those kind of features. This gives you that first glimpse inside the case, and the first thing that I'm not really keen on is the fact that it does come with a 120mm included fan at the rear, but it's not ARGB. I mean, why have a tempered glass side panel if you're not going to be able to see that glorious RGB? On the right hand side panel, there's not really anything majorly going on. It is a full solid panel with a little bit of ventilation at the bottom. Obviously, with the price that we are looking at, it's got a little bit of flex to it. It's not the strongest metal out there, but it does the job. Now, the top panel, this is where things start to get quite interesting because it does have a removable dust filter and it is magnetic as well. The buttons that are on here for the power and also changing the LED of the ARGB fans, it has kind of a tactile, clicky kind of feeling to it. It's actually really, really nice. It does have 2 USB 3.0 ports and your HD audio ports, and they're all kind of covered using these rubber bungs so that you don't essentially get dust inside them. Moving around to the bottom of the case, we have got, again, a removable dust filter. This is just underneath the power supply. It's got kind of quite a fine mesh on it as well. There is room to remove the hard drive cage if you needed extra space, maybe for your power supply and the corresponding cables. You also find that it's got 4 feet on there, which just kind of elevate it a little bit so that we can get some airflow into that power supply. But I think they've skimped out a little bit on the rubber. I mean, you've got this huge kind of footprint and just the tiniest bits of rubber. And finally, looking at the rear of the case, this is kind of a standard affair. We have our usual 7 expansion slots, and they are all ventilated and reusable, which is quite nice to see at this kind of price. You will also find that it does have this kind of locking mechanism, which you're starting to see a lot more on cases, but I do wonder if it's really necessary. And as I mentioned earlier, it does come included with a 120mm fan, but sadly, it's not addressable. Now, when companies design chassis, you will find that they do like to kind of reuse some of the tooling or even the main inner part of the case, and it seems like Antec have done exactly that. Next to the motherboard tray, there's this panel, and it has a few little holes and a few markings that kind of look a little bit reminiscent of what we would have seen with obsolete hardware, so 5¼ inch drives, or even some kind of weird drive setup on here, maybe where some hard drive cages were, something like that. I don't know, it just seems like a little bit of a cop-out. The other thing I don't really like is the fact that it comes with included cable ties. That part I like. The fact that they're black, great. The fact that it has yellow on there, it just kind of destroys the whole look. You can just see these black and yellow cable ties coming through from this side. Personally, I don't like it. Personally, I'd go with some eTeknix branded ones, which are a kind of blacky grey colour. Now in terms of kind of the cooling specifications of the case, I did mention that you have got this removable dust filter. Once you take that off, it gives us a little bit of a view as to what we're dealing with in terms of fans, radiators and other types of cooling. Now you can actually fit up to a 360mm rad in the top as well as in the front, and we've done a few tests and it does seem like we could potentially fit one in the front and one in the top at the same time, both up to 360mm. Obviously, you're not going to be able to go with the thickest radiators on the market. You're probably going to be confined to maybe 30mm thick or 28mm, depending on the brand that you're going with. At least, I think the biggest problem is going to be the fittings on this end. Obviously, depending on your other components and what orientation you want to put the radiators, you might be able to get something sort of squeezed in there. If you didn't want to go down the radiator route, then obviously you can go with your standard air cooling. So there is a lot of space for a lot of fans on here. You can actually fit up to 9. So just take a look and sort of see if you can guess where you can put them. Basically, you can fit 3 fans in the front as it comes included. You could, if you wanted to, upgrade these to 140mm fans instead of the typical 120s that come included, obviously at a slightly extra cost. You can fit 3 120mm fans in the top, and then you've got the 120mm at the back. Sadly, you can't put a 140mm in here. But there is space for 2 more 120mm fans. It's actually on top of the PSU shroud, which is a little bit weird because you would be using them in a kind of reverse fashion, bringing air up and then exhausting out towards the top back of the case. I think that's a little bit redundant and I can't really see it making too much of a difference, trying to take that heat away from the PSU and really sort of passing it up through the GPU and then up and out. So going back to the front fans, they actually come included with the case on the outside of the base of the chassis. They kind of sit in this acrylic bit at the front. Because of that, it does allow you to install radiators up to a thickness of 55mm in this void here. If you decide to bring them fans inside the actual main part of the case, then you are going to be restricted to 30mm. So it's definitely worth bearing that in mind if you're going down the custom loop route or even if you're going to be going with an AIO. So, taking a look inside the case, first and foremost, it looks like we actually have quite a lot of space to deal with. Now, it will accept up to an ATX motherboard. In theory, I reckon you could even get an eATX in there, but then you're going to have trouble getting the cables to where you kind of need it to be and look neat and tidy. Yes, you could come up through here, but it's probably not going to look the greatest. You will find that there's quite a lot of kind of cutouts. We've got this one here, a couple at the top, and quite a large cutout for behind your CPU cooler. Problem is there's no rubber grommets on here, and I can see why they've done that. It's just to kind of cut down on costs a little bit. But I don't know, I've seen other cases around this price point with rubber grommets. Now, other kind of cool features of this, I kind of understand it, but on some cases it doesn't really make too much sense. You have this cutout for your PSU shroud. I think that really works if you're going to be using a power supply like the Asus Thor, which has that kind of digital readout telling you what wattage you're actually utilising on your whole system. I've never really understood it for just your generic power supplies, and I don't think anyone's going to be buying something like the Asus Thor Platinum, which is a pretty expensive power supply to go inside a case that retails for about £70 or $80. So there is that. The other kind of key thing that you will find on the PSU shroud is that weird thing that I spoke about with the fans. You can mount one here and one there in a reverse fashion. I don't really think it's going to make too much of a difference in the, let's say, the real world scenario. Is it really going to help keep things cool? Probably not. You will also find on the PSU shroud there are some cutouts here for your front panel connectors. There is also a couple of other dust filters that come included with this case that you wouldn't have seen or even noticed at first hand. So it comes with this one, which is actually for the front. So if you aren't using an AIO or a radiator, you can put that on the front and it is magnetic and removable. The other one is actually for the ventilation on the other side panel, and we have that fitted in here as well. And then the other, I guess, included feature is another fan. Yeah, a little bit weird. That's meant to go on there. Sorry, let me get it the right way up. That's meant to go on there for that reverse fan action, but then you just have this empty void there, so you have to go out and buy another fan, or do you remove this one? I don't know. So let's talk about sort of maximum components. What can we really fit into this case to maximize all of the space? Well, let's talk about GPUs first. You can actually fit GPUs with a length of up to 405mm. Basically, no matter what GPU you've got, it's going to fit in here. Bearing in mind, if you did go for an AIO or a radiator at the front, it is going to restrict that down, but you're probably still going to find that you've got pretty ample room, sort of, 385mm around that, maybe even a little bit less. when it comes to CPU cooler clearance, you are going to find that you have up to 175mm. So again, you're going to be able to fit some pretty extreme stuff in there. Coolers from Be Quiet or Noctua or some other really sort of big beefy coolers out there. And then the last kind of size that we really need to go through is the power supply. You can fit up to 205mm power supplies, which basically comes to about here, plus your cables. But you can, as I mentioned earlier, remove the hard drive cage, which will pretty much give you the whole of this space to work with. So with the business side out of the way, let's talk about the side that kind of everyone really, I don't know, looks at and goes, oh God, I've got to do this. It's all about the cable management. And from the get-go, I can't really see too many spaces for sort of cable loops and things like that. Obviously you do get the 2 cable ties, which I'm not keen on because they have yellow on there, but that is pretty much all you really have to deal with in terms of cable management. Yes, there is actually quite a lot of space, but I like having little loops over here so I can run my EPS connector down and sort of tie it and then bring it back in and put it into the power supply. But it seems to be severely lacking on that. The other thing that you'll notice from the get-go is that it has an ARGB controller. Now this I do like because it has space for 6 ARGB devices on a typical 3-pin header. They haven't gone with a proprietary connector. Thank you, Antec. And you can also fit up to 6 3-pin fan headers. So having that included is really, really nice. Obviously the ARGB side of it links up to the LED button up here, but if you do want to, you can actually synchronize it with your motherboard if it has the appropriate connector on there. You will also find that there is, I guess, enough space for SSDs. You have one here, and then one sitting on top of the hard drive cage, which I'm a little bit annoyed about, the fact that it only has space for one hard drive. I mean, why couldn't they fulfill this space here? It just seems a little bit odd to me. So yeah, I don't know why they didn't really do that. You will also find that where most of the cables are going to be going, this is slightly recessed to the rest of the motherboard. So it does actually give you quite a lot of room for cable management, and there's quite a lot of space sort of just between here. So even when you put your side panel on, you shouldn't really have any problems, even if you're using things like power supply cable extensions. So what do I think about the case in general? Well, I do honestly believe that even Antec have something that's maybe slightly better with the NX800 with that huge mesh panel on the front. Remember, we did actually do a video on that recently, included with the rest of the NX range. But I can kind of see where this comes in. It does maybe feel like Antec have tried to go more with features over quality. I mean, just the feel of some of the metal panels just, I don't know, feel a little bit cheap. But it does have the features that I guess the average, let's call them budget enthusiasts want. It has the 3 included ARGB fans. It has the included controller with a button on there. And the thing I like about that is the fact that it actually has a SATA connector. Thank you for not including a Molex connector, because that absolutely drives me insane. I think Molex should go to hell, it should stay there and never ever come back. Yes, I can see why there are reasons to have Molex, but having SATA on something like this is an absolute godsend. The only other things that I would really sort of mention and touch on is probably little niggly things that I personally like to see on a chassis around this kind of price, but maybe other people just, it wouldn't be a deal breaker for. This standoff, for instance, why they couldn't have just put one of the little stud ones on there, so when you fit your motherboard, it just kind of stays in place. It can't be that much more expensive to do so. So I would have personally liked to see that. Let's call it constructive criticism. I would have liked to have seen an addressable RGB fan at the rear instead of having this one and then another kind of basic fan. Take them 2 fans away and just have one addressable RGB. It'd probably work out maybe even cheaper. And obviously the ARGB controller has the room and space for it. I personally as well, because I don't like acrylic, the fact that it's so, let's call it a dust magnet, and I'm not overly keen on the styling, I would have liked to have seen a glass front on it. But the problem then is this would look too similar to, say, other cases from Antec. Kind of like some of the NX series, which do have the glass front panel and the glass side panel. So yes, maybe a lot of this is going to come down to subjectiveness from myself, but I think around that price point, it's not going to bump up the price too much. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. What do you think of this? Do you think Antec have better cases out there for around the same kind of money, or do you think there's better from other brands out there? I did mention a few at the beginning, but they seem to be lacking on features, but maybe make up for it in quality. I don't know, it's a bit of an interesting one. Either way, I like the design, I like the features. The quality may be a little bit lacking, but I think maybe there's a few saving graces. So there you go, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know exactly what to do. Be sure to check out store.eteknix.com as well. You can also support us on Patreon, and I will see you in the next video. See you later, guys. Bye-bye. Flux capacitor.